Hello, my name is Alexandra Kushner, and my special issue presentation is on social isolation. The importance of being connected. Humans are social beings. One of the most basic and important needs of humans is to feel connected to other humans, to not be alone. From the moment we enter into the world, we are dependent on others, namely our parents. When babies are first born, they are immediately put on their mom's chest, skin to skin, and research shows how important that initial connection is in the child's first moments of life, emotionally, physically, socially, and mentally. Even as we grow and become more and more independent, that sense of healthy connection carries on throughout a person's life and is very impactful. So it's important to start this presentation by pointing out the importance of connectedness and its relation to social isolation. School connectedness has been defined as the extent to which students feel personally accepted, respected, included, and supported by others in the social school environment. Since students spend the majority of their days in school, their relationships with their peers play a significant role in how they feel about themselves and how well they thrive socially, emotionally, academically, and even physically. Healthy social connections positively impact a person's self-concept, identity, and sense of worth, as well as their overall health and well-being. Students who experience healthy peer interactions are less likely to engage in risky behavior or engage in conflicts. They are more likely to be motivated in school and attain higher levels of achievement and future success. On the other hand, students who lack healthy social connections can become withdrawn, distressed, and socially isolated. This can lead to chronic physical, emotional, and physical effects, which I will discuss further later on in the presentation. What is social isolation? People who lack social connectedness experience what is known as social isolation. Researchers on the topic have defined it as the absence or perceived absence of satisfying social relationships, or the discrepancy between the desired and achieved patterns of social interaction. Social isolation is particularly important to note during the adolescent period, when connections with peers become critical for healthy development. An important distinction to make is the difference between social isolation and loneliness, because even though they are related, they are not the same thing. Isolation can be defined as a state of being alone, lacking in connections to others. Loneliness can be defined as a feeling often brought about by isolation. An isolated person might feel lonely, but being lonely and being isolated are two different things. We can look at this as a case of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Loneliness and isolation do go together, but loneliness is the product, one of the products of isolation. It's a feeling you get from being isolated. When a person is isolated, they are excluded and have little interaction with or connection to others. An isolated person will start to feel lonely because they are disconnected. Now, a student can be sitting in a classroom of 25 other students or a cafeteria of 75 other students and still be socially isolated, lacking in connection, and then start to feel that pang of loneliness among other emotional or physical reactions. Examples of exclusion and isolation caused by peers include discrimination of race, gender, sexual orientation, ethnic or religious background, bullying in person or on social media, rejection of a person by another person or by a group. Examples of self-isolation include life changes or issues occurring outside of school that cause a person to withdraw, the perception of being different from others, fear of rejection, individual or cultural traits, social media and spending more time behind the screen with virtual relationships rather than face-to-face contact, and focusing time on non-social activities. Multicultural considerations to social isolation. Researchers Rebecca London and Dagny Ingram state that statistics on social isolation among adolescents are not readily available. This is in part because schools tend to focus on concepts such as school connectedness and sense of belonging rather than sense of isolation. Still, there is some evidence on the extent of social isolation in distinct populations. Let's take a closer look at multicultural considerations to social isolation. One study of middle and high school students found that 8% of students self reported feeling socially isolated, with a higher percentage among males than females. Research also showed that peer related loneliness is highest and possibly felt most deeply among early adolescents, age 12. Students with disabilities can experience growing social isolation. Many students with disabilities do not receive services related to development of social interaction, and so their isolation grows. Social isolation tends to be higher among gay, lesbian, or bisexual youth, particularly during the time when they are first acknowledging their sexuality to themselves and others. Social isolation is prevalent among homeless youth. Social isolation can also worsen existing problems for highly vulnerable youth groups like substance dependent juvenile offenders. Social isolation doubles their risk of relapse into alcohol or other drug use and reincarceration. More and more evidence shows that if our social needs are not met and we regularly feel lonely or socially isolated, that our bodies will react in a number of ways that are damaging to our health and well being. Rebecca London and Dagny Ingram share very insightful developmental effects of social isolation on physical and mental health. Studies have shown that social isolation causes concurrent and long term health effects, such as depression and anxiety, lower self esteem, sleep disturbances, suicidal tendencies, substance use and abuse, somatic symptoms such as chronic headaches and stomach aches, worse perceived health, and an increased risk of poor health, with a greater risk for higher cholesterol, high blood pressure, and obesity in young adulthood. London and Ingram further explore social isolation's impact on academic development. Research shows that students who report lower connectedness at school tend to feel less motivated and less satisfied at school, tend to be less engaged in and participate less in their classes, have worse attendance records, perform worse on high school exit exams, have a lower likelihood of completing school, and tend to perform lower on measures of student achievement for which schools are held accountable. Example 2. 11-year-old Connie has been referred to counseling because of daily fights at school that have occurred ever since she and her mother left her abusive father and relocated in a new state. She goes to school without breakfast and comes straight home at the end of the school day, not wanting others to know how she lives. Connie heads straight to her room when she gets home, stepping around the physical clutter that accumulates from lack of attention. Her mother arrives home much later and then almost immediately lapses into a sedated stupor from drinking alone, leaving Connie to tend to her own needs. Example 3. Alonzo moved into a new area 2 months ago and is now miserable at his new middle school. All too often, he finds himself thinking about running away or finding a way, as he puts it, to just die. The school and parents jointly refer him to counseling for his lack of attention, for continually gouging his arm with a paperclip, and for occasionally failing to show up at school after leaving home. He tells the counselor that he has no friends, that he is often teased and ridiculed, and that there is no one to listen to or help him. For students such as these three, a school counselor and individual counseling can be the best starting point for intervention. Developing a relationship between student and counselor is the starting point for breaking a student's isolation. This relationship creates a shift in the idea that there is no one to help me, to the encouraging concept of I am not alone and someone does understand. The counselor client relationship will break down unrealistic thinking and provide greater potential for hope and change. As school counselors, it's important to be present, walk the halls, poke into classrooms after school, have lunch in the lunchroom, see who is alone, and be there for them. Just saying hello and showing that you care opens the door and makes a difference. Show them you are present. Rebecca London and Dagny Ingram wrote, as adolescence is a period of especially high risk for loneliness, and young people spend a large amount of their awake time in schools, embedding prevention or intervention efforts in schools seems promising. Schools are an ideal context for practicing and promoting healthy relationships and social skills, both at the individual level, for example, teaching students about the importance of including others and helping those who feel isolated learn techniques to improve their connectedness, and at the school level, for example, nurturing a positive school climate that minimizes opportunities for social isolation. Beyond Differences is a student-led group that promotes social inclusion, specifically in middle schools, through public awareness programs. Their work aims to identify problems in schools that lead to social isolation and teach students how to step in to be a part of the solution. The focus is on prevention rather than intervention. They spread their message through assembly presentations, national social media campaigns, positive community activism, and school-based curriculums. Beyond Differences campaigns have included No One Eats Alone Day, lessons on how to be kind online and stop cyberbullying, and campaigns that focus on celebrating diversity and overturning stereotypes that lead to discrimination and isolation. No One Eats Alone Day was started by the Beyond Differences group to make the lunchroom a place of acceptance and inclusion. So many students dread the lunchroom. There's anxiety over where to sit and who to sit with. Is this seat taken? Will I be welcome if I try to sit with that group? Will they judge me more if I sit alone? For students who have been bullied or are experiencing social isolation in some form, lunchtime can be a painful experience. No One Eats Alone Day occurs in February each year. Schools who sign up to participate receive teaching materials for teachers to use in their classrooms to help prepare for the day, as well as posters and other materials to display around the school that promote acceptance, kindness, and inclusiveness. No One Eats Alone Day is perhaps the most widely recognized campaigns of the Beyond Differences movement. We can emulate these initiatives in our schools, creating an inclusive environment for our students with counseling interventions. We can provide classroom lessons and group counseling presentations on being kind to each other online, how to respond to digital gossip and hurtful texts, and how to use social media appropriately by not letting it take the place of face-to-face social communication and by not using it as a platform for hurt and exclusion. We can create group and school counseling interventions that celebrate diversity and encourage students to get to know each other's backgrounds and accept each other's differences, be it ethnic, religious, or sexual preference. We can take part in activities that teach our students to recognize and reject stereotypes and replace them with positive messages about the strengths of different cultures, thus promoting connectedness and combating isolation. We can work to implement No One Eats Alone every day in our schools. I taught in a Catholic school, a high school, for many years, and at the beginning of each school year, the principal and head school counselor talked to the students about lunchroom inclusiveness and made all students promise that nobody eats alone. I remember year after year, that first lunch of the school year, students held hands to their hearts and pledged that they wouldn't let anybody eat alone. They took this very seriously, and I was so proud to see that truly no one ate alone in the lunchroom of that school. Recently, I've spent some time substitute teaching at a local school here in Connecticut, and they have what is called family meal at lunch. The counselors and administrators understand that the lunchroom can be daunting, and so they decided to take away the dread of finding a seat or sitting alone by assigning seats. Each table is assigned 8 students of mixed grade levels, kindergarten to 8th grade, plus 1 teacher. Lunch is served family style to each table on large platters. Each grade level of students at the table has a responsibility. such as handing out the plates and utensils, pouring the water, getting the family style lunch tray from the cook and serving it onto the table. It truly felt like a family meal with everybody pitching in and everybody at every age, gender, race, disability, ability level included. It was one of the best things I had ever experienced. And any school that I go into now for substituting or for tutoring, I tell them about it because I think it's fantastic. In conclusion, connectedness and social inclusion is a powerful need which, if unmet, can have serious developmental effects. As we continue on our journeys towards becoming school counselors, let's keep in mind that social isolation is more common and more serious than we might initially think. And let's be advocates for combating school isolation through acts of kindness, prevention, education, and being present for all our students. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.